The village of San Isidro sat nestled in a crescent-shaped valley, its terracotta rooftops glowing faintly under a full moon. On still nights, the scent of guava blossoms drifted through the narrow lanes, and the only sounds were the soft hiss of the river and the occasional bark of a stray dog. But this night was different. Maria Alvarez, keeper of a small roadside tienda, was stacking crates of mangoes in the back when she heard it. A piercing wail, mechanical and shrill, echoing across the quiet hillsides. It was the unmistakable rise and fall of the municipal fire siren. Yet the village hadn't tested it in years, and no one had seen the generator for as long as Maria could remember. She froze, head cocked. The sound came again, louder, closer, this time accompanied by a rough, grating squawk. Maria stepped outside, scanning the moonlit rooftops, until her eyes landed on a single silhouette perched on the branch of a flamboyant tree. It was Paco, the green-feathered menace of San Isidro, a red-crowned Amazon parrot with a gift for mimicry and a tendency to shout at inopportune times. He was puffed up, eyes bright, his head jerking from side to side as he let loose another perfect imitation of the old siren. "Paco! Calate!" Maria hissed. But then she caught it. The faint scent of smoke, not from a hearth, but sharp and dry, the kind that scratched the back of the throat. She turned toward the hills and saw a dull orange glow licking the ridgeline beyond the terraces. Within minutes, other villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by Paco's unnatural alarm. An elderly man with a flashlight muttered that the wind was from the east tonight, which meant the fire could be on the slope above the avocado orchards. A murmur passed through the growing crowd, equal parts confusion and fear. Paco screamed the siren again, wings flaring. This time Maria noticed he wasn't calling randomly. He'd face the glow each time, as if trying to point them toward it. She made the decision before doubt could slow her. "We need to go," she told the others, grabbing her phone and dialing the volunteer fire brigade in the neighboring town. The signal was patchy, but she got through, shouting their location and the direction of the blaze. As the first tongues of flame became visible over the ridge, Paco launched from his branch and flew ahead, cutting across the narrow trail that led to the orchards. His green feathers blurred in the moonlight as he disappeared into the darkness, still shrieking that uncanny siren. By the time Maria and the others crested the first terrace, they could hear the roar, dry grass crackling like brittle paper, trees snapping in the heat. But thanks to the parrot's warning, they were not alone. The distant thrum of an engine echoed up the valley, growing louder with each heartbeat. That night, no one doubted that Paco's crazy noise had been anything but random. Somewhere between the mimic's instinct and the sharp tang of smoke, the bird had sounded an alarm that might save the orchards, and perhaps the village itself, from disaster. The volunteer fire truck arrived in a haze of dust and diesel, its headlights cutting bright cones through the night. 3 firefighters jumped from the back, already pulling on gloves and masks, their voices clipped with urgency. The village didn't have its own crew, so these men from El Roblar had raced nearly 10 kilometers over winding dirt roads to answer Maria's call. "Where's the source?" the captain barked, scanning the hills. Maria pointed toward the orange flicker above the terraces. "It's moving fast. There's wind from the east." Paco was nowhere to be seen, but his siren call still echoed ahead, weaving through the crackle of burning brush. It was uncanny, almost like he was guiding them along the most direct route. The captain didn't question it. He simply motioned for 2 of his crew to follow the sound while he radioed for a water tanker from the main station. The trail to the upper orchards was narrow and steep, cut into switchbacks that wound between stone walls and clumps of agave. Maria and a few of the younger villagers formed a human chain to pass buckets from a nearby cistern, dousing the edges of the path to slow the fire's advance. The air thickened with heat and grit, and the glow ahead grew into a jagged crown of flame. At the crest of one switchback, they spotted Paco again, perched on a fence post, feathers singed at the tips, eyes wild. He screamed his siren once more, then flapped upward, circling over a stand of mesquite trees. It was there the fire was thickest, the ground littered with dry leaves that fed the blaze like paper. The firefighters moved in with practiced precision, raking the brush to create a fire break, while another team sprayed down the tree line. Paco swooped low over their helmets, screeching as if to drive them faster. Each time a hot spot flared in the wind, He darted toward it, drawing shouts of, "Ali!" "There!" from the crew. Maria realized that without him, they might have chased the flames blindly along the ridge, losing precious time. The parrot seemed to have a map of the hillside in his head, and he was marking the danger zones in real time. By the time the tanker arrived, the first fire break was holding. The worst of the flames hissed under the spray, retreating into smoldering pockets. Villagers beat at sparks with wet sacks, their faces streaked with ash. Paco landed on Maria's shoulder, his chest heaving. For a moment, he was silent. Then, softly, he croaked out a single note of the siren, low, almost tired, as if to say the emergency wasn't over yet, but they had a fighting chance. And as the wind shifted westward, carrying the smoke away from the valley, Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward the bird that everyone had once called a nuisance. Tonight, Paco wasn't just a mimic. He was the village's first responder. By the time the fire reached the top of the ridge, the night sky had turned a deep, the smoky orange, and the air shimmered with heat. The firefighters from El Roblar worked shoulder to shoulder with the villagers, their silhouettes outlined against the glow. The hiss of water meeting flame mixed with the rhythmic thud of rakes clearing brush, and somewhere above it all came Paco's unmistakable voice. Less like a siren now, more like a harsh, rallying cry. From his perch on a charred mesquite branch, Paco screamed toward the far side of the ridge. Maria followed his gaze and saw what the others hadn't yet noticed. The fire had jumped a narrow gap, racing downhill toward a second orchard. The wind funneled through a dry gully, turning the flames into a rushing wall that could easily trap anyone below. "Over there!" Maria shouted, pointing. The captain whipped his head around, saw the danger, and immediately sent 2 firefighters with a hose team in that direction. The rest of the crew began cutting a new fire break along the gully rim. Villagers rushed to help, hauling buckets from a small irrigation channel that fed the orchards. It was a chaotic ballet, men and women beating sparks from the grass, children running messages between crews, Paco swooping low over flare-ups, his wingtips glinting in the firelight. Each time the heat surged, he would circle overhead, shrieking until someone looked his way, then dive toward the hot spot. It was almost as if he understood the fight wasn't just about putting out flames, but about predicting where they would strike next. Hours bled together. Sweat stung Maria's eyes, ash coated her skin, and the muscles in her arms burned from swinging a wet sack again and again. The roar of the fire dulled to a crackle in some places, but in others, the wind whipped it back to life, forcing the crews to pivot constantly. At one point, Maria caught Paco flying dangerously low near a burning palm. The heat rising from it could have scorched him badly. "Paco!" she shouted. He didn't veer away. Instead, he dove past the palm into a thicket of brush, screaming. Moments later, 2 teenagers emerged from the smoke, coughing and stumbling, having taken shelter there when the flames cut off their escape. The realization hit her like a punch. Paco hadn't been reckless. He'd been guiding them again. The boys were pulled to safety, wrapped in wet cloths, and sent downhill toward the medical station. Paco landed nearby, panting, his feathers frizzed from the heat, but his eyes still sharp. When dawn finally began to lighten the horizon, the ridge was scarred but standing. The fire had been pushed back, confined to a blackened strip along the upper slope. Below, the orchards lay untouched, dew forming again on the leaves, as if the night's fury had been nothing but a fever dream. And there, perched atop the old mesquite, Paco gave one last, defiant wail of the siren. Not out of panic now, but as a declaration. The fight had been won, and the hills would see another sunrise. The sun rose pale and hazy over San Isidro, its light filtered through a veil of lingering smoke. The once silver morning river now shimmered in muted bronze, reflecting the charred ridge above. Maria stood at the edge of the orchard, leaning on a rake, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Around her, the villagers and firefighters moved in slow, deliberate motions, tamping down stubborn embers and turning over blackened soil to make sure no hidden sparks remained. The scent of wet ash clung to everything, clothes, skin, even the mango crates stacked near the tienda. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleated nervously, unsettled by the acrid air. Yet amid the ruin, there was relief. The orchards were safe. The village was safe. The cost could have been much higher. Paco was quiet for the first time in hours. He perched on the roof of the old church, feathers dulled by soot, head tucked slightly as if in thought. Maria wondered if parrots could feel pride. She'd never seen him sit so still before, watching the people below as they worked to clean up the night's destruction. The firefighters from El Roblar took a final sweep of the ridge before heading back, their boots and gloves coated in black dust. The captain clasped Maria's hand. "If you hadn't called when you did—" He trailed off, his eyes flicking to Paco on the church roof. "And if he hadn't?" He didn't finish the sentence, but his grip tightened, conveying everything words couldn't. Children ran up the hill to bring water to the crews, their voices breaking the quiet. One of them, a boy named Diego, carried a piece of burned mesquite wood, shaped like a twisted spear. "For Paco," he said proudly, holding it up toward the roof. The parrot tilted his head, gave a raspy croak, and flapped down to inspect it, pecking at the charred tip before hopping onto Diego's shoulder. The village council decided on the spot to honor the bird in their own way. They would build a small perch near the plaza's mango tree, a place for Paco to watch over San Isidro. But Maria knew no perch could capture the strange, perfect timing of his alarm, nor the way he darted into danger to guide them. As the day wore on, the hills slowly shed their smoke. The wind shifted, carrying the last wisps out toward the coast. People returned to their homes to rest, leaving behind the blackened fire breaks as a reminder of how close they'd come. Paco, however, stayed near the plaza. In the late afternoon, when the shadows grew long, he let out a single soft wail, half siren, half song. It was not a warning this time, but a kind of promise. And Maria, hearing it, felt a certainty settle in her chest. If danger ever came again to San Isidro, the first voice they would hear in the night would not be human, but feathered, and it would be impossible to ignore. In the days after the fire, San Isidro carried itself with a strange, buzzing energy, half relief, half a new vigilance. The villagers moved with purpose, repairing damaged irrigation lines, clearing the blackened ridge of debris, and checking the slopes for weakened trees that might fall in the next storm. Every morning, Maria would step outside to the mingled scent of damp ash and blooming guava, a reminder of how close they had come to losing it all. Paco had returned to his usual haunts, but he was no longer seen as the noisy nuisance who shouted random phrases at passing motorbikes. Now, when he flew overhead, villagers would point and smile, sometimes offering him a bit of fruit. Children followed his flights through the plaza, as if tracking a small, winged celebrity. One afternoon, while Maria was restocking the tienda shelves, Diego burst in with his cheeks flushed. "Maria! Paco's calling again!" She rushed outside, her heart stuttering, only to hear the familiar, high-pitched siren echo across the rooftops. For a moment, dread tightened in her chest, until she noticed that Paco wasn't facing the hills this time. He was perched on the mango tree near the plaza, calling out to a group of villagers who were burning a controlled pile of weeds by the riverbank. The smoke was thin and harmless, but Paco's cry drew a crowd anyway. It struck Maria then. The bird wasn't just imitating a siren anymore. He was associating it with fire. Any fire. That realization sparked an idea. The next day, Maria and the village council met with the school teacher and a few of the older children. They decided to use Paco's mimicry as part of a new fire watch system. If anyone saw smoke on the hills, they would shout to Paco in a certain tone, and the parrot, if he responded, would draw attention faster than a runner could reach every house. In the following weeks, the villagers practiced. Paco took to it eagerly, almost gleefully. If someone pointed to the ridge and shouted, "Paco! Fuego!" he would launch into his piercing siren call, flapping from rooftop to rooftop until the whole village was looking toward the hills. It was messy, unscientific, and yet oddly effective. Maria began to think of the parrot not just as a survivor of the fire, but as its legacy, proof that even a disaster could leave behind a tool for the future. The ridge itself seemed to carry that same memory. Grass sprouted quickly in the blackened soil, and new shoots pushed through the charred remains of mesquite trees. One evening, as the sun set in long ribbons of gold over the valley, Maria stood outside her tienda and watched Paco soar across the plaza. He landed on the church roof, shook out his wings, and called the siren once, loud, clear, and sharp enough to send a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a warning this time, she knew. It was a reminder. The hills remembered the fire, and so did the bird. And now, so would they. The dry season tightened its grip on San Isidro, stretching the days into long, brittle hours. Even without smoke on the horizon, the villagers felt the weight of vigilance. The ridge, though healing, still bore black scars that would take years to fade. One late afternoon, a restless wind swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the faint scent of distant burning. It wasn't sharp like wildfire smoke, more like the acrid tang of a cooking fire. But Maria noticed Paco lift his head the moment it arrived. He ruffled his feathers, eyes narrowing, and gave a single clipped wail of the siren before falling silent again. Maria's instincts prickled. She stepped into the lane and scanned the hills. The sky was clear, the sun still high, but the wind carried strange undertones. Wood, dry leaves, something oily. Diego came running from the schoolyard, breathless. Paco's on the old bell tower. He keeps looking toward the western slope. Maria grabbed her phone and called the fire watch volunteers. Within minutes, a small group had gathered, following Paco's gaze. The western slope was rocky, dotted with sparse brush, not the most obvious place for a blaze to start. But the wind was tricky there, funneling through narrow gullies and twisting up the cliffs. As they hiked toward the slope, Paco shadowed them overhead, swooping low when they slowed, his siren call bursting out in short, urgent blasts. The terrain grew rough, and the wind stung their eyes with dust. When they finally rounded a bend near a dry ravine, they saw it, a pile of smoldering debris tucked against a boulder, hidden from the village's view. It wasn't an accident. The way the pile was arranged, branches stacked tight, a few soaked in something flammable, told a different story. Someone had been trying to start a fire here, waiting for the wind to carry it uphill. They stamped out the embers and soaked the ground with water from their canteens. Maria took photos for the authorities, her jaw set. This wasn't nature, she said quietly to the others. Someone wanted the ridge to burn again. Above them, Paco circled once, then landed on a nearby rock, his head bobbing as if to check their work. He let out a long, low whistle. Not his siren, but something softer, almost satisfied. By the time they returned to the village, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of guava blossoms again. But the mood was different now, warier. Word of the attempted fire spread quickly, and with it, renewed respect for their strange guardian. That night, Maria lay awake listening to the sounds outside, the hum of insects, the occasional bark of a dog, and faintly, Paco's restless chatter in the mango tree. She realized he wasn't just sounding alarms, he was listening too, waiting for the moment when danger brushed against the edge of the wind. Weeks passed, and the memory of the fire settled into the rhythm of daily life, like a scar that no longer hurt but was never truly forgotten. The ridge was greening again, stubborn shoots breaking through the charred soil. The orchards flourished, their leaves glossy under the returning rains. Yet, for all the calm, the people of San Isidro never stopped glancing at the hills each evening, as if expecting to see that telltale orange glow. Through it all, Paco kept his vigil. He no longer screamed the siren without reason. Those days of constant mimicry were gone. Instead, he seemed to save it, holding it like a weapon in his throat, ready to unleash only when the air itself told him something was wrong. One cool dawn, Maria stepped outside with her coffee to find Paco perched on the ridge above the village, a dark speck against the goldening sky. He was motionless, facing the valley, his silhouette sharp and still. It was a strange sight. He rarely stayed that far from the plaza, unless something had drawn him there. By midday, word came from a neighboring village. A brush fire had started in the hills, 2 valleys over, already contained but dangerous in its early hours. The wind had been blowing from that direction all morning, just enough to carry the scent of trouble to Paco before anyone else. Maria felt a shiver run through her. He had been watching the danger without making a sound, as if judging whether it would ever reach them. The villagers began calling him El Vigía, the Watcher. They spoke of him in the same breath as their volunteer brigade, not as a pet or a curiosity, but as a member of their defense. When the council discussed formal fire protocols, Paco's siren became part of the plan. If the bird called out even once, the first step was to gather in the plaza and check the hills, no questions asked. One evening, just before the rains came in earnest, Maria saw Paco in the mango tree, feathers slick from a light drizzle. He tilted his head at her, eyes catching the lantern light from her tienda. Without warning, he gave a single clean wail of the siren, then fell silent. Maria looked toward the ridge, nothing but dark clouds rolling in. She smiled. "Testing the system, aren't you?" The rain came heavy that night, drumming on the rooftops, hissing against the leaves. Somewhere above it, Paco's perch swayed, and he sat alone under the storm, watching. And though no fire burned, Maria felt the comfort of knowing that if danger ever came crawling through the hills again, it would first have to pass the keen eyes and sharper voice of the Watcher of San Isidro.